Hi there, my name is Fleming, and usually on this channel I do music and a mix of music and vlogs. I'm going to be talking about a bit of tech. It's kind of been part of my setup for a while. And I'm talking about my 2008 Mac Pro 2.8 GHz 8 core. It has two 2.8 GHz Intel Xeon processors in it, 16 GB of RAM, and currently has a 320 GB hard drive, which is the original hard drive that came with it. Since I got it, people have been asking, is it worth it? Why would you get a computer from 2008? Can it still match what's out there today? And I'm going to be looking at that in this video. And the computer that I'm going to be comparing it to is my 2015 15-inch MacBook Pro, which I absolutely love. And this Mac Pro is sadly being sold because I spend a lot of my time on the go and I don't really have the need for a desktop anymore. But that's not to say that I'm not sad to see it go. I'm really sad to see it go, and I hope someone can get proper use out of it. And hopefully they'll also fully upgrade it, which is what I wanted to do, what I planned to do, but I kind of like ran short on time, didn't have the time to do it, didn't really have the need to do it anymore because I had my MacBook and didn't really spend much time at home, and also it would have costed a bit of money. So as we get into this video, as I said at the start, this machine is a 2.8 GHz octa-core 2008 Mac Pro. It has two Intel Xeon 2.8 GHz quad-core processors in it. It also has 16 gigs of RAM, which is slightly higher than the original 2 GB of RAM that it came with. It has a non-stock GPU. It has the stock 320 GB hard drive. I took my SSDs out of it already because I'm selling it tomorrow. And I think other than that, it's fairly stock. It also has Bluetooth on board, which I don't think was stock when these came out. I have to say, the design of this Mac Pro, which is nicknamed the Cheese Grater, is one of my favourite Apple designs. It's just so classic and timeless. So in the light of Apple's new MacBook Pro 2016 model, we have to look at the in-outs on this machine. And this is one of the places where this machine really shines. On the front, it has a headphone jack, two USB 2 slots, a FireWire, and something else which I can't exactly recognize from here because I've never actually used it. It also has two super drive bays. One of these is actually in use, the other lies empty until you upgrade it. At the back we also have three USB 2 slots, another FireWire, optical audio in out, microphone input, headphone output, and also two LAN ports. So one of my favorite features of this Mac is just how easy it is to upgrade, and I'm going to demonstrate that here. So you just pull this, lift it up, and there we have it in its full beauty, the internals of the Mac Pro. So this model is the 2.8 GHz 8 core model, which has two Intel Xeon quad core 2.8 GHz processors. I also have it upgraded to 16 GB of RAM, which is held on two of these slots. It also has a non-stock GPU. So as we look down here, we can see we've got two RAM bays which pull down like this. So here we have it, that's one RAM bay, and it has 4 sticks in it. So each RAM bay has 4 sticks of RAM in it, and I think these are max upgradable to, I think, 8 GB each, which I would have loved to have done, but I sadly did not have the time to, or the money to. So this is what one of the RAM sticks looks like. It's a 2 GB DDR2 RAM stick. As I said, I think these are upgradable to 8 GB each on this model, so 8x8 is 64. Yeah, they're fairly standard, so you don't have to worry. And then moving on, we have a non-stock GPU. I can't exactly remember what model this is. The main reason I got this was just to have a multi-monitor setup with this machine because it is such a beast, and for video editing and stuff, it's a great bonus to have a multi-monitor setup. So this machine has 4 PCIe slots. 2 of these, which are, I think the bottom 2 are PCI Express 2 slots, and the top 2 are PCI Express 1.0 slots. You could technically upgrade this. Obviously the fact that it is still on PCI Express 2 could be a bit of a bottleneck. However, putting a GTX 960 or something in it, you should be able to get about 70% of its intended power out of it. As well as that, you could upgrade the remaining PCI Express slots to USB 3.0 ports, or also put a PCIe based SSD in there, which could bump up the speeds pretty much. Obviously this is going to be one place for bottleneck, and I'd always recommend using the PCI Express 2 slots. The difference between PCI Express 2.0 and 3.0 is not as noticeable as that between 1.0 and 2.0. If you're using the PCI Express 2.0 slots, you shouldn't notice too much of a difference, or you shouldn't be too restricted. So up here then we have the 4 hard drive bays, each number 1, 2, 3, 4. And the great thing about this is just how easy they are to upgrade. So if I pull out number 1, which is the only one that has a hard drive in it at the moment, you just pull it out and the hard drive is actually loaded into the hard drive bay, which is pretty cool and makes it quick to kind of swap out and replace, and it connects straight in there. So if you were to upgrade this to SSDs are usually in a 2.5 inch case at the moment, so meaning that because this takes 3.5 inch cases, that you'd have to get an adapter, which are about probably 5-6 euros on eBay or Amazon, which is not too bad. And because this is a machine from 2008 using eSATA, the speed of your SSD may be slightly restricted, but it shouldn't be too much, as in you should still get a very significant performance boost from having an SSD inside here. My ideal setup would have been to have 64 gigabytes of RAM, a GTX 960 in there as the GPU, USB 3.0 ports in the PCI Express 2 as well, then also keep the original hard drive for kind of like files that I don't really need too much, then have one SSD for the OS and the system files, and one SSD for like media cache and media files for programs that I'm working with in terms of like video editing or music editing or something like that. This system is definitely very upgradable, and you can do a lot with it. You can get them for about 500-600 euros depending on what specs are in it. I would highly recommend it just because of just how upgradable it is. Look, for $500-600 or euros, getting a 2.8 gigahertz 8-core machine that has the potential to be upgraded pretty close to the kind of current standard is pretty damn good. Yes, it has only DDR2 RAM, and the current new version is DDR4, and it also doesn't have PCI Express 3, and it doesn't have USB 3.0 stock, and it doesn't have the latest version of SATA, and it doesn't have SSDs built in, but these are all kind of things that you can do afterwards. And because this is the Mac Pro 3.1, which is the one that came out early 2008 rather than the one that came out the year beforehand, this one's fairly upgradable to very modern specs with a lot of modern components as well, so you're not restricted as much as you are with the previous generation. Now for this Mac Pro, you can, I think, officially update it to El Capitan. This one's currently using Yosemite because I don't really feel the need to upgrade another step to El Capitan, which you can't do on the 2.1 version, which is the one that came out in 2007, because I think that's still stuck on the models that have like lions and tigers in their name. That's still stuck on that Mac OS, which means it's €100 or maybe even just €50 extra spent on this model is definitely worth it because of just how upgradable this model is. The 4.1, which is the one that came after this, has a slightly different setup inside. It also sells for a lot more, even though there's not much difference, and the 2.8 gigahertz 8 cores aren't that common on the likes of eBay, and even the likes of the quad core 2.6 models are pretty damn expensive. And now you're getting much more for getting the new model, the newer 4.1 model. Not really, you're getting a bit more upgradability, but you're still limited in terms of you can't go over 64 gigs of RAM, and you're still limited by old hardware. So to anyone, I'd recommend them get a 3.1. Make sure you get a 3.1 and not a 2.1 model, and save yourself the extra money in comparison to the 4.1 and put that money into getting extra SSDs, extra RAM if you need it. I'd say 16 gigabytes of RAM is great for majority of things. I never needed more. I would have liked to get upgraded to 64 gigs just for the sake of having it. I'd also say if you're heavily into video editing, upgrade the GPU. You might enjoy it more with the higher GPU, especially if you can get it to run CUDA enabled rendering. I'm not sure if you can do that. I never really researched it 100%. In terms of performance, in comparison to my 2015 MacBook Pro 15-inch, which has a quad-core i7 in it, this with the hard drive didn't fare too badly. Not as badly as I would have thought. For exporting a Premiere session, it took maybe about 30% longer, 30-40% longer, which is actually acceptable seeing as this doesn't have an SSD in it, or didn't have an SSD in it when I ran the tests, and that it's limited by a lot of things like the DDR2 RAM and stuff like that, whereas my MacBook Pro has DDR3, 16 gigs DDR3 RAM, and it has a PCIe based SSD, and so many other things that help it get higher performance. I feel like if you were to do the setup that I said, which is put 2 SSDs into it, one of them for System OS and Program OS, and then one of them for Media Cache, I feel like you could get very close, if not even overtake, the speed of a 2015 i7 quad-core MacBook Pro 15-inch. Now, the MacBook Pro 15-inch retails for, currently new, it's €2,300. This is worth about $500-600, so you can see that you can get a lot more bang for your buck with this. Of course, you need an extra monitor and all that, but just for the sake of upgradeability, you could get a very, very powerful machine out of this if you have the money and time to invest in it. The ideal setup I would have liked to have for this would have been 64 gigs of RAM, as I said, 2 SSDs, USB 3.0, PCIe Express 2 slot, and also a GTX 960 graphics card with probably 2 gigs. I don't think I'd need more than that. And I also would have liked to see what it would have been like running Windows. I never got around to it just because I just didn't have the time. I spent a lot of time on the go and using my other laptop or my other PC, and I spent a lot of time using the MacBook for doing work, so I never really had the need to. I never really found the time to do it. So if you see one of these for maybe €500, €600, €700, would I recommend one? Yes, definitely. If you see one and you think, oh, that's kind of fairly cheap, ignore the fact that it's almost 9 years old, because there's a hell of a lot you can do to get this up to the spec of a €2,000 laptop. And I know saying that, I don't know exactly how far you could get and how far even above a €2,000 MacBook Pro you could get with this, but you could get pretty damn close, I'd say. You do have a 2.8 gigahertz 8-core processor, which is basically server grade, which are not too common anymore, especially not in PCs. And a new version of this, which is the trash can one, could run you up into a couple of grand, and they're not meant to be that great, and they're actually not very upgradable at all. So do bear that in mind. So my biggest draw to this would be the fact that it has a 2.8 gigahertz 8-core, and just all the upgradeability, like and the ease of upgradeability as well. The 4 hard drive slots that you can put SSDs into, the 8 slot RAM, and the 2 PCI Express 2 slots and 2 PCI Express 1 slots, and also all of the USB and FireWire and stuff like that. Now, my audio interface that I use at the moment, which I kind of scaled down a bit, is a Focusrite Clarett, which runs over Thunderbolt. Of course, this won't be able to use that unless you got an adapter, and I don't really want to do that because that's all extra money, because this doesn't have Thunderbolt, and that's the kind of only downside I saw to using this in comparison to my MacBook Pro. Is that a big deal breaker? Not really. Once you have peripherals that run over FireWire instead of Thunderbolt, you're good to go. And to be honest, do I think there's a massive difference between FireWire and Thunderbolt? At least not one that you can really tell that much. And Thunderbolt is basically out. Thunderbolt 2 is basically out of date anyway now, with Thunderbolt 3 and USB-C coming in and becoming the standard. So am I heartbroken about Thunderbolt 2 not being on board this machine? No, not really. For the likes of audio production and video rendering and stuff, the one reason why I'd say to pick this, even when I'm at my desk, why I always prefer to use this rather than my MacBook Pro, even though technically my MacBook Pro would be higher spec, especially since this, I had taken the SSD out of this, because it doesn't wail as loud. Now, I know the MacBook Pro is, when it's kind of idling, it's literally silent. It's like dead silent. But as anyone who has had a MacBook or has a MacBook knows, when you try to export something or the system comes under load, it really wails and howls and it screams. Whereas this thing has a kind of a very light, very subtle light, kind of just basically the fan noise. And when you put this thing under heavy load, it doesn't speed up at all. It just stays constant. You can put it under as much load as you want and it will not kind of seem like it's under stress. And that's one thing that always worried me about the MacBook, was the fact that like just how hot it's getting and just how much it's kind of like straining itself. Whereas this, I've never felt that I've strained it. Yes, the performance without the SSD was slower rendering videos than my MacBook, but I kind of felt more at ease using this. I could kind of like safely go away from it or do other things without being disturbed by the excessive noise of the MacBook Pro. So do I recommend this machine? Definitely. So if you do get one or have one and you've upgraded, let me know how you got on. And yes, to the future owner of this, I wish you the best of luck. I hope you go about the upgrades that I would have loved to do, but yeah, I'm sad to see it go. Bye bye Mac Pro. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you in the next video. It's going to be a cover next or a vlog or something like that, but I'll talk to you then. Bye bye.